Pretty impressive, isn't it? Welcome to our panel on the art of film design. We hope you enjoyed the reel. It's important to get your blood going a little. And it's to convince you you're in the right room with the right people. But what's really interesting is when you think about it, is how superfluous it is to show you those images. And that's because they're already in your head. Think about the moment when one of those defining moments hits the screen. It takes no more than an instant. You know where you are, you know what's going on. It's there. What's that about? Think how deeply those images must be buried in the lizard brain, bumping up against Michelangelo's David and the Mona Lisa and the Taj Mahal. It's a little spooky. But that's what film design does. It creates a world we inhabit for a moment and we remember forever. And we have literally the primary originators of all those images right here on the dais today for you. We'll have to begin by putting faces to films. I suggest you hold your applause till the end or you'll waste some valuable time, but it's your time, so please yourself. In alphabetical order, we have Scott Chambliss. Scott has already broken the applause rule. Thank you, Scott.
Not my fault.
Not your fault. Besides Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness and Tomorrowland, as you saw, he also is responsible for having designed Alias and Felicity, which I'm sure you remember. MI3, very long list. And he's finished Godzilla, King of the Monsters, which will be coming out next year. Woo. Next, we have Richard Bridgeland. You saw him, he set the look for the very first Resident Evil, that now is up to number 7, I think? 7 or 8?
7 or 8.
Yeah. As well as doing the very first Alien vs. Predator, the good one. He also designed the 70s detective flick, The Nice Guys, as well as Priest, which you must know, Pandorum, which I'm sure you know, and Fright Night. Richard.
Well, I'll break the applause roll too.
Excellent.
Howard Cummings. Howard, with his long list of credits, chose only to show Westworld Season 2 because there is so much in there. Thanks, Howard. But if you want to know, his other films are Long Kiss Goodnight, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, and Contagion. You saw Naomi Chohan's Constantine, I Am Legend, A Wrinkle in Time. She also did American Beauty, Ben-Hur, Training Day, and Replacement Killers. She ain't here. She's a production designer, so she's stuck in New Orleans working. But she was going to be here to prove that we're not all middle-aged white guys. And we're not all middle-aged white guys. I do cult films like Home Alone, Species, Terminator 2 3D, Forbidden Zone, Night of the Comet, that kind of stuff. That's my thing. I'm glad to see so many of you are here today. I suspect it's because you already know a little about film design or are just intrigued by the whole idea of, think of this, purposeful image creation. That's what we do. Our purpose today is to give you some insight into exactly what we do and how we do it. For some reason, our art is very oddly obscure. So congratulate yourself for being here, because when you think about it, this is almost certainly the only panel on film design that's happening today in the entirety of planet Earth. And that's the truth. A couple notes. We want to acknowledge our sponsor. Our sponsor is the Art Directors Guild. The Guild is a Hollywood showbiz union representing graphic artists, illustrators, storyboard artists, model makers, scenic artists, set designers, art directors, and production designers. It's engaged in some really important political work as we speak. Since the purpose of today's panel, however, is to talk about practical aesthetics, if you have questions about the Guild, which is probably good, we have a representative over here, Andrew Stumma, the good-looking guy with a beard. He can tell you anything you want to know about the Guild. But when we go to the questions, that's not what we're going to be talking about. On your chair, oh, not on your chair. As you leave, you will be given a magazine called Perspective. Once again, I don't understand the cover of this magazine, why we're giving it out at Comic-Con, but open the magazine. If you have the slightest interest in film design, open it, it's gold. There's full of information on film and design that you'll find nowhere else. It's an absolutely unique magazine. You can even subscribe if you really like it. So anyway, we're going to begin by going through each panelist, giving them a chance to talk a bit about their own approach, what they do, maybe one of their signature projects. What were they given in order to make this movie? What were they told? How did they conceive it at the beginning visually? Maybe even how they somehow accomplished getting that conception all the way to the movie theater. That's the test. And we'll save at least the last 10 minutes we'll save for questions from you. We've set up a microphone. You're welcome to start lining up anytime you like. And several of us have agreed to go to the autograph section afterwards. So if there's something you need to communicate one-on-one, we will be there for you. So, shall we start with, how about starting with Scott? Scott is interesting because when you look at his reel, here's Star Trek, super fabulous, futuristic, and here's Guardians of the Galaxy, super fabulous, and yet they look completely different. There's no way you could get those two worlds mixed up. What was that like, doing that, Scott, making that?
Yeah, they're such different projects, and at their root, I think Star Trek tried to have some reality-based accessibility to it, and Guardians of the Galaxy has none of that whatsoever.
And how do you express that?
In visual terms, you make a bunch of shit up for Guardians of the Galaxy.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, those two directors couldn't be more different in their approaches. JJ's a very thoughtful guy, and he's a storyteller, and he speaks story. Characters are part of the story, but it's the story itself, it's the focus, always with him. James, for him, it was the characters, and the story itself was almost secondary. It was just kind of a vehicle for the characters to be front and center all of the time. And ultimately, there was no such thing as a visual storytelling arc in Guardians of the Galaxy, whereas in Star Trek there's a very strong present visual storytelling arc.
Can you describe that?
Sure. I mean, with any movie that we do, I think a production designer tries to tell the story in visual terms to the point that you could turn the sound off or down or whatever, and actually be able to follow the story just by looking at what you're seeing consistently. And with Star Trek, I think you can pretty much do that. Guardians of the Galaxy, that's more like theme park design. It's it's really, I think it's 5 different sequences, really over-the-top set pieces that somehow had to have coherence so that it didn't feel like you were watching 5 different movies. There had to be some kind of visible through line to it, and yet they didn't really refer to each other at all. And those, to me, are the big differences in terms of designing those two films.
How about Star Trek in relation to all the other Star Treks, the classic, which is on every night,
Yeah.
and has its own aesthetic?
Mm-hmm.
How did that affect you?
It changed my life. It was very strange. That's it's actually something I'm really proud of, because that could have been just a major disaster.
Yeah.
When we redid it, but JJ, God love him, he wanted to take the original source material seriously and really honor the optimism that lies at its heart. And I think that's why JJ's 2 movies worked as well as they did.
So you think it was the emotional component
Yeah.
that carried across?
Absolutely.
Because you could have caught holy hell from people for messing with
Yeah.
Star Trek.
Oh, we do.
You
You're
still
kidding.
caught holy hell?
Yeah, somebody wrote me and said, "Can I have your headshot so I can put it on my dartboard?" So I gave it to him. Why not?
It's good to get attention. Yeah, it's good to get attention. Howard, do you want to talk about Westworld, or do you want to wait?
Sure. I chose only to put Westworld on because, unlike these guys who, I, as an audience member, going, how the hell do you do these spaceships? And I mean, how do you create these worlds? And you're not outside, you're not anywhere else. How do you sustain that sort of visual interest through the whole process? And I've always wanted to sort of take that on. And so my resume, this Westworld's the only science fiction I've ever touched. And so it was, I don't know why they hired me, but I guess I did a good pitch in a meeting, but I've had a lot of historical sort of films based on history and that period projects and stuff, but getting the chance to do Westworld where you're marrying 2 worlds together and how they balance each other, to me was like, wow, this is a great I jumped at the chance to get to do this. Disclaimer, I did not do season 1. So then I chose just to talk about this because it's interesting to inherit a language that was established, kind of like what Scott was saying. There's a language that Nathan Crowley, who I always admired his work, and like if I was a director, I'd probably look toward hiring him.
Why don't you explain who Nathan is?
Nathan was the originator of the pilot for Westworld. So, and he's, recently did Dunkirk and Batman, and he's an amazing designer. And so I liked what he did, and what was interesting was that finding out how they came across creating that language. I think people think that, oh, we have a ton of money on Westworld. Well, compared to some other shows, maybe, but really we don't. So one thing that was exciting was like, oh, we're going to do new parks, and we're going to be Shogun World, and all this new stuff is going to come in, and sort of partway through prep, that's when I discovered, oh yeah, and by the way, there isn't any more money than they had the year before. So I'm going, oh great, but then the robots are going crazy, and they're kind of going through every set that they did last year, which I trashed, because they were all like rioting and stuff. So I had to redo all those, but then I had to take whatever money I had left to create Shogun World or the Raj or these new underground labs, and so it was. I was going, wow. We had one set that was a Civil War fort, and kind of for this thing it's called Fort Forlorn. And so I probably shouldn't tell all these stories, but I'm going to tell, when we started out, I had an approved set, 1.2 million, big, for a TV show, big. And so, when we came the day before we started to build it, they kind of said, yeah, we kind of don't have that money. And I went, what? And I was going, okay. That set in the end, and we can't use the location because we can't afford it, so why don't you put it over here in this area that we already have? And I go, okay. And then it was like, and in the end it was 375,000 and not 1.2 million. And so if you watch the show, you'll notice that there are a lot of tents in the back area where there's a wall. And so there's an art to handling this. You want to give something scope like that. And you have to really invest in these moments. I already knew that, like Shogun World, we actually, I scouted Hawaii, because there's a temple called Byodo Temple in Hawaii, and we're going to use that for the outside of the Shogun Palace, and we're going to stage all these things, and I did all these pre-vises for it and stuff like that. Yeah, well, couldn't really afford to go to Hawaii. So then couldn't really afford to build the Shogun Palace either. So what we ended up doing was the show creator, who's an amazing guy, Jonah Nolan, Christopher Nolan's brother, and he's written with him a lot. He's tremendously visual. It was really exciting to work with somebody like that who really was a part of what you're doing. And he came up with the idea. We had been watching a lot of Kurosawa movies where they set up these encampments that are called Jinmaku. It's a war camp, with this weird curtain. Like they didn't have tents, they had these curtains, and then they would actually fight through them. And it was so crazy and weird and graphic and kind of amazingly interesting that he said, well, why don't we do that? And so that's what we ended up doing. And I think in the end, graphically, it was so much more interesting than any palace that I would have thrown together. So the challenges of doing a show like that is it was really amazingly interesting. Oh, there's one thing, like for instance, that sort of driven by that kind of thing was something I'd never worked on, was something creating. We had some things called drone hosts that manned these secret underground laboratories, and so I'm going, okay, I don't know what the heck a drone host looks like. Okay, so I kind of referenced what they did in the first year, and I was always trying to tie my design to what what ideas had come up and try to just take it to the next level. So I said, oh wow, well these guys, they don't need eyes, they don't need to eat, they don't need. So we ended up having these things that were kind of faceless and creepy running around, and so I came up with this, and I said they don't really need skin either, honestly. They just need some kind of armature. So we kind of developed this thing, and then we all sat around and talked about, oh gee, how are we going to do this? And I was imagining it like it was mostly CG, like it would never have to actually make this. And I go, oh no, we're going to have to make it. And it in fact, I said, you mean it's going to be a guy in a suit? And they go, yeah. And I go, okay. And we can only afford one suit. And I went like, but they kill each other. So it was this kind of crazy. I'm going, okay, let me work on that. The makeup effects guy and I were, Justin Raleigh, had worked together before, and he's great. And I sat down and we were developing what that was, and sort of the illustrator, who's this great guy, Darren Dockerman, he was working in a method that we could actually make the suit out of the illustration. It was in the modeling that he did. So that was all going along. And then I did a drawing for the lab set, and I brought it into Jonah, and I go, okay, here it is. And he goes, how are we going to shoot these guys killing each other, Howard? And I go, I don't know. I thought that was virtual. He goes, no. And he said, I said, okay. So I had to design the set based on one guy in a rubber suit. And I was going, okay, so I took the lab and I just took all the pieces, the different parts of the lab, right? And I spread them into a quadrant with runways in between, so that you still had the labs and you still had the functions of the labs, but then the guy in the rubber suit could be featured in one of these quadrants while the guys in the cheap suits were in the background. And so, and then we had so I designed these labs with kind of translucent panels, so you could kind of see shapes. And it was all because we only had the money to do one suit, really. So, but in the end, it's sort of like the suit was quite beautiful. The guys that we picked for the guys in the suit were actually they were worked in the ballet. And actually, there's some cool shots that never ended up. We made them all dance in the suits one day, just for fun. But
You can keep going. Come on.
okay.
This is interesting, right?
Yeah, no. So that's why I thought. Okay, well, so what was amazing? Like when I found out, like, how did they come up with the crazy lab? I love the labs in Westworld. I love the fact they were just glass and black, and it's all about lighting. To me, I'd worked a lot with Steven Soderbergh before that, and he does everything pretty much with practical lighting because of the kind of camera he uses. So I wanted to figure out how could I do that with stage lighting too. The simplicity of it I thought was great. I don't get to do that, and so I thought, okay, this will challenge me, and well, it definitely did. So, but I found out in walking around and went, oh my gosh. If you go to the Pacific Design Center in West Hollywood, if you walk through there, all the showrooms are those labs. Nathan Crowley basically pulled it together by walking through, and so we expand the sort of mesa, the sort of underground, center of this park is actually, a lot of it's taken from the Pacific Design Center. So this year we had, I think, bowls running and crashing through and people falling down escalators and stuff. And that was in there, and we were going, okay, that budgeted out to be some crazy cost. But we ended up doing it. We actually had to rebuild the labs, make them so that you could smash real bowls through them, and then they became kind of mechanical bowls with CG effects. And then I added a whole fake escalator where people were falling down, and we tied it to the real place. But it was interesting to watch me as a designer find somebody else who took some simple idea and then just took it a step further. And I said, wow, I'm going to do the same thing. So it's a great kind of wonderful way to learn from somebody else. And then I also realized you could take these ideas and then just keep referencing, much in the way that you'll have to rethink Star Trek or something, and rethink yourself for Guardians of the Galaxy. you can develop languages based on simple things. And I think that's just comes from being able to observe and sort of, pick up on stuff. And so I was really, I'm really in awe of these guys. I just never thought I could do something, so simple. But I mean, I had to steal from things like, 2001 Space Odyssey. They're so good, you can't get too far away from that ever, and so there's parts of the labs that I just lifted stuff off of that because it just made sense for what it was. But our challenges on that show are so crazy because we're always trying to, even the Western stuff, it's like, this year we had, at one day, that we had to shut down the stage because half a mile away the hills were on fire. So we had another stage in Sylmar, that area caught on fire on the same day. They had to pull people off a shooting, it was the Thomas Fire. We were shooting by the Thomas Fire, and you could see flames behind Ed Harris's head. In that, so they decided that wasn't a good idea. And so we only had one set left to work on. It was all down in El Segundo, which is by the water, so we were safe there. So we all went down and ran, and like everybody converged down there. But that kind of show, with all the Western landscapes, trying to invest in what you can create. That's why in the little clip I put the Utah sort of big vista. It's all referencing movies. It's all Westerns. And the idea, it's a theme park, right? So you're not really creating, I'm not doing a historical thing, we're creating a vision of the West. And so with this year, everything I put in the reel is all the new stuff that was added this year. And we went to Utah, but we went to different places. Like Kanab is a great area in Utah where it has a big Western history, and there's these coral pink sand dunes where I think you saw that sort of the hero Native American character is kind of riding across to go to this weird other area called that no one quite knew what that was, where the secret underground laboratory is. We shot that in the Trona Pinnacles. So for one little series, we actually had to invest a lot. In order to get scope, you have to invest a lot into traveling, going places, trying to give it an expanse. And I think I put about 18,000 miles on my car in 3 months and then said, oh, you're gonna rent me a car. Then I put 38,000 miles on that car, and that didn't include the time that I was in the Scout van, which was average about 6 hours a day. So pretty much a lot of what I did was driving, but it was important to get scope, and that's what we try in all of our work, and their work especially. It's all about scope and the different challenges to get that done.
Great.
That's exhausting.
Yeah.
When we're copying things, we always say, I wonder if someone has already solved the problem for us. That's how we decide to do an homage when you need to do something. So Richard, you've lived on these great big action pictures, right? You've done amazing things like Priest and Pandorum. Would you like to talk about the challenges of trying to build a spaceship for no money?
Oh, sure. Pandorum was a lot like Howard's things with budget on that. Is I was tasked with building a spaceship for Pandorum with a very, very limited budget. But because it's a spaceship, there are no locations to go to. We couldn't go anywhere and find that place. So we had to build everything. It was early on we decided, like from the script, that this was about a bunch of people who were sleeping in a spaceship. They spent the whole time asleep. The fact that they woke up was accidental, and they would not be awake until they got to their mother planet. So we kind of, in story terms, we took it back to, well, what kind of spaceship would you build? And it would have to be something very, very basic. You don't need like beautiful living spaces or anything. And really the only thing that was going to have any kind of real sort of beauty to it and sophistication was going to be the control area. So we decided to make this, and I had almost no money, and I had to figure out how I was going to build it. I couldn't use traditional set building techniques. So we started looking at materials, and with the money we had, and we came up with plastic pallets. And we built the entire spaceship, almost all of it, from different kinds of plastic pallets, because they've got these amazing different textures and designs on them.
What's a pallet?
A pallet that that you stack goods on, and
Don't tell them.
They're very specialist, yeah. So and that's how, and then also we had to get scale into this thing as well. I couldn't build, unlike Scott, who could. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear how much he actually built of the interior of the the Enterprise. But so often now it's like we build a certain amount of set, or we'll build up to a certain height, and then we put green around the top, and it all gets extended. In this movie, we decided that really the spaceship, the exterior was going to be CG. The interior, we weren't going to do any CG. We were going to do it in camera. We were going to create everything physically, and which meant building big sets. I couldn't really do that with the money I had, so I built smaller sets, like all these corridors where they have these long chases going up and down, and I had to build corridors where we could kind of get like a whole load of different shots in the same place. To extend them, I just built big mirrors, and literally 12-foot mirrors, stretched on frames. And whenever we wanted to extend a set, I'd stick it at the end of the corridor, and the corridor went on forever. It was fantastic. And it's actually a technique I've used since that, it was like, God, this is fantastic. This works great. So, so I did a station recently for the commuter where we had to build Grand Central Station. And as you know, the platforms for that just go on forever. So we built a certain amount of it, and I built even bigger mirrors in the end. And we had to get the crowd walking both ways, because when we did the first take, all the crowd were coming one way, and in the mirror they're going the other way, and it was like the parting of the Red Sea. Anyhow, that worked great in Pandorum. And actually, most of the science fiction movies I've done, apart from Priest, where there was a lot of CG in that, but most of them have been, we've been tasked with trying to create as much as possible in camera, partly because everything looks so much more real when you really do it, and even if you can do like all these kind of old-fashioned stage illusions, using darkness and smoke and mirrors and all the, all of that, it just has its own kind of authenticity that I think the eye really believes. So like when we did Resident Evil, and particularly AVP, they're very old-fashioned movies. I built models for some of the sets, like the Queen coming out of the Queen alien, coming out of her in her chamber, being raised out of the pit and everything, is a giant model that was like 12 feet high. You could stand up in it. I've got all these great pictures of like the Queen and taken from a low angle, and the statues there and everything, and then some guy standing in the background ruining it all. But they're all, these were all big models. The pyramid was a big model. We built the whaling station at the beginning, we built for real as a backlot set, but we also built a model of it because there was all kinds of sequences that we were going to shoot on that then got cut just before we started shooting, so we didn't use that. But it was a way of using our budget to the best, in the best way, so that we could kind of achieve things on a pretty tight budget. I mean, Resident Evil was a very tight budget indeed. I had an executive from Sony come up to me. I was interviewing for Priest actually. And an executive from Sony came up to me and he said, "Man, I almost lost my job because I found out how much money you didn't spend on Resident Evil." So, But again, we built everything in camera. And again, we use models on that. The train was a model. The lift shafts, that whole sequence at the beginning, with the lift shafts going up and down and everything, that was all a model. So a bunch of things, very, very kind of old-fashioned filmmaking there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. You want to tell us a little bit about the new Godzilla? Can you?
Oh yeah.
Big reaction.
Oh sure, yeah. All the monsters are real, and they're all about 300 feet tall. And it's hilarious watching actors try to react to a monster that isn't there. That's one of my favorite parts. The cool thing about the movie, and I hope it comes across, I haven't seen it cut yet, but Michael Dougherty, the director and writer of it, his intention was to make a sweeping epic out of it in kind of an old school David Lean style, and he wanted wonderful atmospherics, very painterly visuals to go with the monsters, because in our story the monsters are a product of Earth's environment, and they have a dramatic effect on the environment itself whenever they appear in the story. And since we have 4 different monsters who have 4 different effects, it meant for a lot of interesting color work that you don't really associate with Godzilla movies.
Which 4 monsters?
I don't think it's a secret. It's Godzilla, Rodan, Ghidorah, the 3-headed dude, and Mothra, my personal favorite.
Are the little girls in it?
The little girls? I'm not telling.
Little girls are
Yeah,
there.
something's happening in there though. But yeah, it should be good, or it'll suck. I mean, you never know.
We could each make lists of movies we thought were going to be great that didn't turn out.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah, long list.
Well, that's the thing too. I mean, sometimes you get involved in a movie and there's no script at all. Or like when I started the second Star Trek, I had 3 pages. It was like, Act 1, we're going to be on a really beautiful island, and something's going to happen with natives there. Act 2, this is literally what I got to work with. Act 2, trouble at home. Act 3, we don't know yet. But then they wrote this script that was great. It was a political commentary. It had lots of emotional qualities to it, but it was talking a lot about our society, much the way the original TV series did. And I was thrilled because it was really grown up, and Cumberbatch did a great performance. He had some really tremendous scenes that ultimately weren't in the movie, as were all of those scenes that had all of that great political content. And at the very end, they excised the heart and soul of the story, what made me love it the most, and just amped up the explosions and the fights and all that crap. And that was that.
Just like in The Way We Were.
Yeah, right.
They cut out all the politics for the love story.
They did, didn't they? I forgot about that.
So we're close to the 10-minute thing, so we're starting to take questions. Miss?
Thank you very much. This is always one of my favorite panels, and I appreciate so much all the work you do, and I appreciate you coming here to talk to us about it. I'm interested in what you said about the sets that involve chrome and glass and mirrors. What does the camera do to stay out of the way of reflecting and all of that? How do you work with the cinematographer?
That's yours.
Well, that was
You're the mirror guy.
The angle of incidence equals the angle of
Yeah.
reflection.
Oh,
It's
the mirror set extensions is easy. You just offset the mirror ever so slightly, and then suddenly the camera's gone. It's much more difficult in sets like Howard was describing, or I did the tunnel in. There was the laser corridor in Resident Evil, which was written as a concrete corridor. Everything was written as concrete in the script. And I couldn't figure out how lasers would work in something like that. And so I eventually came up with that. I actually had been in a hall of mirrors, and that gave me the idea to for that particular corridor. But that was mirrored and on all sides, and then all the reflections that just went on into infinity. And it was yeah, it was a good, interesting day when I presented that to the DP. It was just like, and where am I going to be in this? But the thing was that the image was so strong that everybody was prepared to work with the limitations of that image, I think, you know. And so everybody understood what we'd get from it. And then, you know, and so it really was like we could only have the camera in this spot or, you know, over here, and it could only move in a certain amount on a, you know, in a particular shot without being seen. And then also you get a certain amount of grace because like with all those reflections, it's like, who knows what that thing moving in the background was. So,
Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Hi, I was wondering if you could delineate for me one more time the line of demarcation between the production designer, the art director, and the set designer.
that's one of you. Yeah, you guys.
Let's not say the production designer gets his name on the poster. I'm not joking.
That's all you need to know.
And he gets his name in the main title. End of story. The other guys work for him. Right? Am I lying?
Yeah, the basic thing is I get hired first, and then I hire an art director, and then the set designer after, generally. And we all, you know, interface. And it's a little bit like, I don't know, isn't production designing can be a little bit like conducting in a way, you know, where, because I know I certainly can't make all this stuff or draw this stuff. I can't get all of it on paper for everybody. So in a weird way, you're like, it's like a conductor with a orchestra where you're, you know, a lot of our job is management, you know. Oddly, you would think, oh, it's creative. A lot of it's management. And how to get the best out of people. Like sometimes it's, you know, weirdly on Westworld, like people said, oh, you're a great delegator. And I went, no one had ever said that to me because they always the opposite of being controlling and whatever. And I realized that if you can latch onto people's talents and give them enough information to go in a certain direction, you know, that's probably the best way to sort of guide somebody rather than saying, do it just like this. You know what I mean? And in a way, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot if you do that. So you want to take the people you have, find out, everybody has their own talents, find out what are they good at, and then I'll generally shift some work to those certain people to do certain things based on that.
Hi, so you talked about it a little bit, but how do you know, like with CGI, how do you figure out what's going to be CGI and what's not going to be CGI? Like when you're first doing it, or do you decide that later, like as you're doing the shooting stuff?
Yeah, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but I tend not to think about it in those terms. It's at the very beginning when you're conceiving of a world, the whole thing is real in your imagination. And by the time it starts taking a shape and you start thinking of the practicalities, what essentially will need to be visual effects becomes pretty evident somewhere along the way. But I try never to just automatically paint something unless it's going to be the exterior of a spaceship or a monster. It's like, yeah, of course. But I try to envision the whole story as though it was going to be real and stay in that world until I just can't anymore. It happens faster than you might think, but it's not terribly mysterious, at least in my experience.
And don't you think, like, if you can achieve it in camera, it's generally the honesty of that will translate to the image. And so you always, I think you kind of start with that. It's not like none of us walk in and go like, oh, I don't have to worry about that part because it's all CG. Now you still have to worry. It's still the design of it all. And then in fact, you know, even on Westworld, I thought, oh man, they do a fair amount of CG. I thought, oh, this will be so much easier. Not. And that's because when the Jay Worth, who was our visual effects captain was would tell me, you know, no, Howard, this has got to be 90% of this has to be real. And I'm going, how the heck do I do that? But we did. We figured it out, and then we figured out how to pay us. So I would design something, send it in. He'd go, no, there's not enough real stuff here. The guy who's doing the visuals would tell me there's not enough. So we'd go back and do it again. But in general, I think you try to go for that, right? But as Scott said, certain things are just not going to happen, but you want to give them the at least environment that they can relate to.
Yeah, and he touched on something that's really important. I don't think there's a complete understanding of what the production designer does for a film, especially the ones that have a lot of visual effects. We're designing the whole thing, including the visual effects. That's all part of the visual story. It's the visual effects folks who then manifest the complete design at the end in post-production for the most part. On occasion, some of us get to see the project through post-production. As you know, for me, Tomorrowland was one of those cases where Tomorrowland itself was not going to be done until our last days in post, and so I was consulting on that to the end. But on other projects like the Marvel ones, once shooting ends, they kick the production designer out the door and don't really care what you have to say about anything anymore. But our job is to do the whole world. Yeah. You're welcome.
My question is for you. So, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is, to me, one of the most visually distinctive films I saw this year, and even more than the first one. So I was just wondering what some of the design influences you took from and how you did it on that final look.
Yeah, that's a good question. Marvel's really different in terms of working as a production designer for them. On all the other projects I've worked on, I've had a one-on-one relationship with the director. We develop the visual language together, and we come to learn about the project together, kind of hand in hand. With Marvel, the director is just one person sitting around a big conference table. Kevin Feige is usually there. Victoria will be there on occasion. She's the head of visual effects, and everything is discussed by all the players all the time. It was still my job to come to the party with all sorts of ideas and thoughts, but when it came down to the specifics of each sequence in that film and the overall look, it pretty quickly revealed itself to be this exercise of massive, flashy abstraction and throwing ideas up against the wall to see if anything stuck. Because, as I said before, there was no real visual storytelling arc to the film, and as such, there aren't those kind of visual anchors that tell you where you need to go next time around. And the ultimate compliment in Marvel speak is, wow, that's cool. So if I heard that on the set design, then I knew that was going to be in the film. That's it.
Well, gang, it's hard to believe that that's our 15-minute hour. But any of us who can will go to the autograph thing. Thank you. Thanks for coming.